Hey, map painting for filmmakers community. This is Garrett Fry, and we are here to talk about the day for night DMP challenge, turning this sky into a nighttime sky. So, just to give you a little bit of background on why we're doing this DMP challenge exercise, is because it's a very common task for map painters to do skies. And the reason that map painters do skies is because when the director is on set, they typically shoot for the actors, which means they light and they compose the actors. And then the sky, oftentimes, because of the limitations of film cameras and the dynamic range that these cameras are limited to, the sky goes completely dark. And so afterwards, they want to simulate more of what you can see with your human eye and less what is the limitation of the film camera. So they will, in post-production, ask a matte painter to put in some kind of sky back there. Or the other scenario is that a lot of nighttime shots are actually shot on sound stages. So there is no sky. So you're just putting a sky back there where no sky existed before. So why start with a daytime photo and make it night? Why not start out with nighttime photography of a sky? Well, there's a couple of different reasons for that. Nighttime photography is inherently difficult because of the really long exposures and the grain that you get, especially if you want a really nice, crisp, clean image. Also, another reason that it's difficult to start with nighttime photography is that the night look is baked in to the photography. So when you're put on a shot and you're told to put in a nighttime sky, they're going to probably want a couple of different options to take a look at. And that nighttime sky already has it baked in, and it's pretty hard actually to move it extremely from one end to the other. So that's why if you start with a daytime sky, it gives you the most flexibility that you can possibly get. And if they love the cloud formations that you have and they're like, well, it's not really this type of night that we want, how about we do it like this? Then you have everything that you need in order to move it, wherever you want to make the most perfect nighttime sky for that particular shot. All right, so before we start getting to look at some of your artwork that you've submitted, let's talk about the self-scoring sheet. So here on the self-scoring sheet, I have a bunch of questions or points to look over while you're looking at your work. And like I talked about in other DMP Challenges videos, that it's really important to be able to self-assess your work. You are your best critic. So this exercise is, yes, we're learning how to do these skies and doing these critiques and things like that, but really you need to be able to self-assess your own work. And so that's kind of what this is all about too. So we start out with 20 points here, and we subtract 1 point for each one that you don't have on here. So here are the questions or the points that we're going to be going over. And your artwork, everybody has submitted. I think I have about over 70 submissions for people's artwork, so which is really, really awesome. There's a lot of participation on this. So what I've done is I've gone through every single piece of artwork and I've put it into a category. And this category represents the biggest thing that could help the artwork. Okay, and then beyond that, you're going to look at this list and see how else that you can improve. So we're going to be going through and looking at a bunch of different examples. We'll go through each one here, and then we'll look at a bunch of examples about how to improve those. And your work is all in there. So the first one that we're looking at here is research. Did you do research? So did you go online and look at nighttime skies? And then did you look at films that had nighttime skies? So in line with that, we're going to take a look at some films that did some nighttime skies in my own research for this project. So let's take a look. So this is our original sky that we're starting out with. So on the left here, we have a still from a film, The Green Mile. And then on the right, we have another one, and I can't remember the movie, but both of these are actually from the Matte World Digital website. So if you have not been to Matt World Digital, the website, it's a great resource to take a look at some work that that company has done. So I have worked for Matt World Digital. That was my first film job in the industry. They are no longer open. They had to close their doors, but it is a fantastic place to look at work. There's been a lot of amazing artists that have gone through there. Chris Evans, Mike Pangrazio, Brian Flora, Chris Stotsky, all of those guys that I've worked with and known, they have all gone through Matt World Digital. So it's a really cool place and a resource. Um, so you can see on these two images here, some of the things that kind of stand out. And that's that the sky is not taking over the shot. I think that's the first thing to see is that the focus is still the characters in this case on the left, and in this case it's this structure here on the right. Okay, so those things tell stories, and that's what the movie medium is all about. It's about visual storytelling. And so if your sky is too predominant in the scene, then that becomes the storytelling point and not what is supposed to be. So, there's a couple different scenarios where you would want a bit more of a hero sky. And that would be if the story is about the sky, if there's some kind of storm brewing, or you've got, Batman or Santa Claus flying across the sky, then that would be important to have a really nice, beautiful sky. But in most cases, if you do a sky that draws too much attention to itself, then you will have the director, the art director, your visual effects supervisor pushing back on you and saying, hey, that sky is much, much too loud for our shot. It takes away the point of the shot. So subtlety is the first thing to look at. And so I have that here on our number 2 here is the subtle approach. So you want to make sure that it's subtle. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple more images here. So here's a couple of skies that we're going to take a look at. This one here and this one here, both from Episode 1 Star Wars. And Brian Flora, who had worked at Matt World Digital and ILM, who is an amazing, great, fantastic artist. He's the one who did these, and we're going to just be taking a look at the treatment on the sky. So you can see here on this sky that there's a very clear lighting direction to this sky. So you can tell that it's off screen. It's coming in from this left side. There's a bit of blooming that's happening from the right side and kind of going off onto the left. The detail level in the sky, in the shadows, has kind of gone flat. So that's often what happens when there's atmospheric perspective and there's moonlight, that the dark shapes go completely flat, and the only thing that we're really seeing is these shapes from the highlight side. So that's something to consider as well. Also, you can look how nice and soft everything is. It's very, very easy to look at, and it's such a beautiful thing right there. So let's take a look at this next one here. This one actually has the moon on screen. So you can see there's the moon, and the lighting direction, everything kind of follows that. And I can bet you or guarantee you that this sky, this daytime sky that Brian started out with, is that's actually where the sun was placed. So that's kind of a key too. If you have a daytime sky and you see the sun on the image, then that's where you put your moon, because that's where the light is emanating from. So this moon also has a really nice halo, and you can tell that, and also that this moon is not full. Okay, so the first thing that people think of when they're doing nighttime skies and they're like, hey, I need to put a moon in there, the first thing that they do is they put a full moon. So a full moon only happens like, what's like once a lunar cycle or whatever. So all the other times you've got these waxing and waning of the moon and it's probably a bit more realistic and more interesting to have a moon that's not completely full. So you can see here's a moon. It's not completely full. It has a nice halo to it, and it has just a little bit of red that's going in there, which is very typical for moons, is to have just a bit of warm light that's coming in from the moon. Also, the stars that we see here, we don't see a huge star field. So you remember on this one right here, we don't see any stars at all. On this one here, the stars that we see are only the most bright stars. Okay, so that's very important because even though we are we're kind of cheating what more than what the camera would see as far as the range. Because if this were a real structure and it was this bright, and then the moon was this bright, we probably wouldn't see any stars at all. But because we're kind of cheating it a little bit and we're kind of making it a bit more hyper real, then we can just put a little indication of stars. But if we put too much stars in there, it becomes very, very unrealistic. Okay, so now what we're going to be looking at is this is some photography that I shot. This is actually the same location as what we have up here. So it's a bit narrow cut in right here, but it's about this view right here. And this is what it looks like at night. So I was not able to get a clear sky with some really, nice cloud shapes in there, but as it's kind of in the winter, and so everything here is a bit overcast. So but this does kind of give us some nice information. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna expose up on this just a little bit. So if your screen is dark, then you can see a little bit, and you can see that there's snow on the ground. So different time of year, obviously. But some things that we can gather from this is that we have dark shapes in here, and they go flat, right? Just like the matte paintings that we saw before, it goes flat. Here, we're not really seeing a lot of cloud shapes, but we can see like there's little flat dark shapes in there. And then the lights here. Something really interesting about lights that at night, and we saw it in here and here, even though these are a bit more illustrative, is that there's actually, for modern cities, there's a lot of different temperatures of the light, a lot of different colors. And so we get some that are blue and some that are green, and maybe some people still have Christmas lights on their house or whatever. But so you can see there's a lot of variety in those lights, which is really, really cool. This little light streak, so this was probably, I don't know, 9:30 at night, and so sun had set at probably 5:30. So there's this little light band here. I can't really explain where that light is coming from, but it's really cool, actually. So if you wanted to simulate this look in some kind of matte painting and stuff, it sure is great to go out there and to shoot photography. And if you're not going to use this exact image, then you can use elements from this image or use it as a concept to base your new matte painting from. All right, so that is all of the research that I've done. Obviously, you could do much, much more and make a real study of it and become an expert at nighttime shots. So let's see. Let's go through this self-scoring. So we talked about doing the research, subtle approach, moonlight lighting direction, incorrect moon scale, extreme color. So there's some things that we didn't go over on this list with this research that we did. So let's go ahead and jump in to some of your work. And so let's contrast the research that I have with some of your work. So let's go ahead and turn this off. And the first category that I have here is number 3, which is the moon lighting direction. So, remember what I said about the placement of the sun, and that is actually where you would place the moon. So if you look at this, um, there's no sun here. The sun is way up here. That means that if you were going to do a day for night, you wouldn't actually put a moon in here. You could maybe cheat it a little bit and bring it on screen. Surely you could do that. But if you were being completely accurate in the lighting direction, the moon would not actually be on the map painting. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these. So this one from Steve, you can see Steve's put the light right here, and then it's kind of radiating out, but then there's not a directionality coming in, and so that doesn't match with the clouds there. Jan here has put it right over here on this side, and Lou has put it over here. So all of these should be emanating from the top here. And and it, if it comes down to it, and you have to move, if you have to move the moon, or they're like, it's really important that the moon is over here, then you just have to find a different sky that has the correct lighting direction. So here you can see Torrance has attempted to make that move of the moon, and then try to kind of correct for the lighting direction. And yeah, that can be, you can do it in some exceptions, but you can see over here that there's a lighting direction difference between these clouds and these clouds. Okay, so ill here, they have put the moon way over here. Well, it's kind of I guess that would be more of a sunset-ish thing, but it's not coming from here, it's coming from over here. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be talking about is moon scale. So if you remember us taking a look, this is something I didn't mention, but you can see how small the moon is. And if you go out and about at night and you're looking at the moon, typically the moon is pretty small compared with a large landscape that you have here. So if you're going to err anywhere, I would err on the small side. So we have a rather large moon right here that Max did. And then Arky here has a kind of a large moon right there. Probably, I mean, if you can see my cursor, I think you could get away with one that's, maybe a fourth, or, maybe an eighth of the size on that. This one from Andrew, another large moon there, and Sean has a big moon right there. Okay. And then it looks like Sean has put in, Sean and Andrew have put in different skies back there. But even with this, the addition of the new clouds, it still doesn't appear that it's being lit. So moons often do this thing where the moons are behind clouds. You can see it in our reference image up here. That's beautiful right there. Moons do that all the time. There's like little wispy clouds and stuff right behind the moon, right in front of the moon, and that is the effect right there. And so it's not so much this look or this look here where it's peeking out. It's kind of nice to have it like kind of being illuminated from behind. Okay, so all right. So the next category that we're talking about here, so we went over moonlight direction, incorrect moon scale. We're talking about extreme color in your skies. So having extreme color in your sky is something that you probably don't want to do, and you don't want to do it for a couple of reasons. Because typically, if you're not really familiar with color space, all of these images are done in sRGB color space. For an actual matte painting for a film, you are going to be using Cineon color space, which has a different profile color curve than sRGB. And which means that you can have more range in the shadows and the lights and things like that, as opposed to having more in the midtones, which sRGB has. So the point that I'm making when I say that is that if you push your sky to really extreme colors or really extreme lights or really extreme darks, then oftentimes you are going to be pushing it beyond what it should be. And then when it comes to the final output or in the comp, then it's all these really crazy colors. And you have some colors, you have maybe some darks that are below 0 on the color scale, and some that are above 1 that shouldn't be above 1. Those are called super brights. So for this example, we're not really going into all of those technical things having to do with color space, but the point is that you don't want, stylistically, you don't want your sky to be too extreme in its color and its lights and darks. You also don't want it to stylistically to be that way, because it's just a bit too extreme. So, okay, so let's take a look at some of these examples. So we have Jeff here, and this has this kind of really strong blue cast to it. Something that you can do as a test is just pop on a hue and saturation and see what happens to your image when you crank the saturation up. Maybe that's actually a common technique with matte painters to make sure all their elements are working together, is to push it really, really hard. And also another reason that I didn't mention why you don't want to be so extreme on your sky is that there's a good chance that when your sky gets into the composite, then the compositor will actually push around your sky. So if your sky is already near broken because the colors are so extreme, that when they start pushing it around, then it's going to make it even worse. So okay, so this has that really high blue cast to it. And then this as well. This has a really strong blue cast, and it's really very saturated. Okay, so let's say this is the same one. This is Myra, if I'm saying that right. So this one here from Guido, is that how I say that? Sorry if I'm pronouncing your names wrong. So this one here has these like really saturated colors. So I think if you were to back off on that, also if you were to take this and pull out some of the saturation, it may not work all the time, but maybe with some of these other ones, that's actually a bit better to pull out that much saturation. That's a ton of saturation. Although it makes your image monochromatic. We're going to be talking about monochromatic images in just a little bit. Okay, so we talked about these. Okay, or Leah. Also, this is a bit extreme on the colors. It also has we're going to be talking about this in a little bit as well, which is the high contrast. You don't want something that's super high contrast. If you compare some of these images here, these are not really crazy high contrast images. And they don't feel crunchy. We'll also be talking about that too. So this one has a really blue cast. So that is from Hope here. And then Annie here, that also has a really strong blue cast to it. Here we go. This one here on, I don't know how to say that, Shurin. This one has a really strong blue cast. I just popped a hue saturation on there and just sucked some of that color out. And I think that makes it a big improvement. Also, this is another image, very blue in cast. This one has kind of an extreme look to it. It's a bit beyond what we talked about, because we talked about changing that particular sky from a from a daytime sky to a nighttime sky, not necessarily replacing it, but this is an example of something that's pretty extreme. So that's Anna, and this is also Anna as well. So, so those are examples of extreme color. So, those can be fixed if you just kind of back off on some of the saturation. Or really just kind of pick a different approach for how you set up your color adjustments so that when you are making changes to your sky that you're not actually just kind of building in all of this saturation that's really hard to get away from. Okay, so here's something to talk about on our list here. It is number 6, warm foreground, cool sky. So under a sky there, under nighttime, you're going to have a bit of variation. The sky is going to be a bit cooler. The ground is going to be a bit warmer. However, when those relationships are too extreme, then you have a disconnect between the sky and the ground. So these images that I have here represent some examples of having a sky that's too cool and a ground that's too warm. And then there's a kind of a disconnect. So we have Sean here that has this sky and that's pretty saturated, and then this kind of warmer ground here. So Eli here, this one is pretty subtle, and I think you could probably be okay with it. And on your screen, it may not show up very well, but there is just a slight difference. You could probably bring this a little bit closer to the sky, but that's more in the normal range here. So that's pretty subtle. So Greg here, or Graham, excuse me, has this sky, and then you look at this color, and they're really quite different. So that one there. Vera, this one here, she does have, you can see that there is the lighting direction. It's off screen, which is fantastic. It's a correct lighting direction, which is great. So this is looking good up here. However, I think there's a bit of a disconnect. This is a bit blue, and then it just gets kind of green right here. So there's just a little slight discrepancy there. Same with this one as well. So, and this one maybe illustrates it better because this is a little more blue, and then this is more green. So blue, green. Okay, so Olieski. This one is probably, I think you can look down here and you can see that this is more appropriate of a color to be within the sky. And then there's this kind of like soft split between this stuff and over here. And you can see over here on the right where this is a really drastically different color, almost like this is getting lit from some kind of light source. So actually just taking this and bringing it back in. So the danger is that, and then the line that you're not trying to cross here is that you don't want your image to become monochromatic. You want your image to still have color in it, just not so extreme that it feels disconnected. So Andrew here, this one is a bit different because this one is blue and this is green. So it's not necessarily warmer, but there is kind of a disconnect. So this would probably be just a bit warmer. Down here, a bit more blue, and that would kind of connect them together. All right, so the next one we're going to be looking at is high contrast. So when you're doing nighttime shots, you don't want anything to be to have too much high contrast. And high contrast is one thing, and then high contrast will lead into something else, which is making your image crunchy. So I have examples of crunchy things, but certainly some of these high contrast things can be considered a bit crunchy. So that's where it's so contrasted that it's creating artifacts on your image. And I know that when we're talking about artifacts, Facebook does awful things to images, and so it probably accentuates the crunchiness of your images, which is unfortunate. But what it does do is it actually reveals some of the issues with your painting. So I've been at some studios where they look at your images on this beautiful projector, and it has such an amazing range on it and it looks great. And then you take your image and you put it on a TV or something, and it looks awful on the TV, and that's because the range on your image, it just, when it gets crunched down, it looks worse. It looks really bad. And there's some images that get crunched down and look just fine. See, because these are 8-bit images, all that we have here, and they look great. And then if you have an 8-bit image and you stick it on Facebook and it compresses it and all that kind of stuff, and it looks really bad, then you're like, it's probably your original image you need to back off from some of the contrast and how hard you're pushing your original image. And if you're pushing it too hard, that's where it gets crunchy. So here we are looking at high contrast. So uh, Stoneman, oh, sorry. So we can see here that these blacks here are super, super black, right? So we don't want extreme blacks. Like I said, when you go from Cineon color space into the compositing color space, which is going to be linear, then a lot of these dark values will go below 1, and they'll be super blacks, which they could become black holes. So technically, you want to stay away from that. So this one here, these are really, really strong blacks in here, and really strong blacks in here. And then these are really bright lights. So that's Jun. And then Tony here, you can see these really kind of like black holes right in here. Okay. Victor here also has these really extreme blacks, like even the image that we have up here had some shapes in the dynamic range. So I'm just exposing up on this image, and there's all kinds of information there. And you want to make sure that when you've done these, that if you were to pop an exposure on here, and you were to expose up, that you would make sure that there was more information there instead of just like these big black shapes. Okay, so Archie, so this is another one that's pretty extreme in the contrast levels there. Okay, so actually I'm going to move this up. We're going to talk about Crunchy next here. So this one, Crunchy, this is an extreme versions of having high contrast that's led to artifacts on your image. And so part of it is that when you're doing skies, it always needs to be in 16-bit if it's going to be going to film, because you will get banding in the flat areas of gradation. So you can see up here, let's see, maybe I can crunch this up just a little bit more, and you can see how banding it has become. Part of it is that these images most likely were done in 8-bit, unless you brought in those CR2s that I provided you in as 16-bit. Then you're working in 8-bit, so which in cases can cause this banding here. Also, probably the Facebook posting on Facebook will also create this banding here. But we're just using this as an example. If you start out with 16-bit images of skies and keep it in 16-bit, then you won't get this stair-stepping of this banding that's going on there. So that's Leah here. John here, you can kind of see something that happens. You can see all this like stair-stepping of the image, and you can see like oftentimes you'll get like these little patches of colors and stuff like that. And so that's something that you'll want to avoid. So this represents something that's been pushed probably a bit too far. So Hamid, this one has some grain to it. So if it's possible that the image that I provided you had a lot of grain, and the color corrections that Hamid is doing here is bringing out that grain. The point is that you don't ever want grain in your sky. So when you bring in those CR2s under the camera raw settings, you can actually pull out some grain. So this is called static grain. You don't want static grain in your skies. And because when it goes to comp, they're going to put a moving grain on top of it uh, to simulate that it actually was shot on film or digital. So, because to us as human beings, we've been looking at film footage so long and some digital cameras that have this kind of moving grain that we like it. We prefer our images to have grain in them. And when films don't have grain, then it looks strange. So all film has grain in it when you go to the movie theater. So this sky here, eventually it's gonna have grain, but when you work on it, you should get all the grain out that you possibly can to avoid static grain. So that's static, non-moving grain, and then you have moving grain on top, which is very problematic. So here we are with Chris. You can see down here that this is really extremely dark, and then this gradation as it coming up is going to be all stair-steppy right there. Okay, here with Tony as well. So these are there's all kinds of like artifacting, stair-stepping stuff going on there. Okay. So the next one that we're going to take a look at is monochromatic images. So that's where it's been color corrected in such a way that it just creates a wash of color, and there's not really any color variation in it. So yes, we want it to have a blue cast to things. Well, I mean, depending on the style of the sky that you're doing, you want it to have, everything needs to be affected by the sky, but not everything should be that color. So you can see on this, something that Natalie has done is that it's kind of blue everywhere. If we look back at our reference images, like there's all kinds of warm colors in here, and this is like green and this kind of like bluish brick, all in here. But we don't look at either one of these and say, oh, that's a monochromatic image. There's only one color that's being applied to everything. I mean, if we were to take a solid color here and then just put it on the color here, now they're monochromatic. You can see it's only one color that's going throughout the whole image. So if we look at this, we'd be like, oh, there's something really wrong with this image. And then we turn it on, look at all the color that comes back. So we want to make sure that our images still retain some color. That color just needs to look like it's being moonlit. So here's Natalie. This one is Robin's. It's pretty monochromatic here. Here's also another one that is from Robin that's green. Sergey here, this has nice cloud shapes and direction, although there's probably, it has that kind of same monochromatic feel to it. So Igor here, it has this image, although there are some warm lights, which is great. That's adding color, but overall this and this has kind of like the same feeling to it. So bit monochromatic. So Annie here, this has a little bit of variation, but probably could have more, more color put into it. Daniel here, this one is really monochromatic. Some films actually are very monochromatic, and that's how they stylistically have been done. What you have to do is that you would be matching your sky to the plate, which is the film footage. And if the film footage has color in it, then you need to make sure you've got color in your landscape. And by the time you see it in the movie theater and it's all monochromatic, and they've actually sucked out the color when they were doing the color grade. And the color grade is the very last thing. It's after visual effects. And so a lot of times, that's why when you work on films, you're like, oh, that shot was beautiful. And then you get in the movie theater and you're like, oh, the colorist, they ruined my work. Because the colorists have the last final touch on everything, and so they could suck out color, they could make it look flat or monochromatic, or they could accentuate it and make it look more bright and colorful. Um, so certainly that's happened to me on multiple occasions on films. So this may be the look of the film, but it's not. Typically, you're not doing it to the footage at this. You're not sucking it out. Then the colorist doesn't have anywhere to go with it because it already has the color taken out of it. So Patrick here, same thing, and then Lai right here, same thing, a bit monochromatic. Okay, so the next one on our list here is we've gone over monochromatic, is that the stars are too visible. So here are a couple examples. So if you're going online and you're looking for star fields, that's great to start with that because that's probably going to get you the very best images to do star fields. But really, when you're doing it, you only want to show through the stars that are the most bright. So this one here, this one here, this one here, this one here. So you want to put a filter on that so that or an overlay where you're only allowing the brightest stars to poke through and then all the other ones to disappear. And that's going to give you the look here. So this is Marcy. I think that's how I say. So that's their image here. Lee. This one is like outer space. So that is like a camera that has a really long exposure, and that's not going to happen in a film. We're not going to see the Milky Way because if it had such a long exposure, then all of the actors would have these big smeary strokes of where this kind of like onion skin like path of where they're walking because they're exposing on one frame and you're getting their path, so because of the long exposure. So this would have to be a really long exposure for it to show up like that right there. So Torrance here. This is a bit better, but I think you could back off more on the stars on this one here too. And then Hope here. I think you can back off on some of those stars. Okay, so now we're talking about, here's a couple of images that are a bit hard to review because they're not of the same, doesn't have the same sky, so some of these things don't really apply to it. But we have some images here. This is actually a star, so I think the moon is going to have a bit different treatment. This is kind of like the star over Bethlehem star, but so I think you'd want to replace this with moon, but it has a nice treatment for that. So this one, nice image. It's not the same sky. That's and then this one here, not the same sky, but nice treatment. Same with that one. And this one here, this one's actually quite nice. This is Steve. This has made this landscape look like a icy wasteland, which is pretty cool. And then when you see the little mailbox down here, you're like, people live here. So, anyways, so those are some images that don't have the right sky. So, okay, so on the list, stars are too visible. We went over that. And then now what we're talking about, we already talked about crunchy. Now we're going to talk about low contrast. So here's some images that kind of have the opposite problem of the high contrast, that they are too low contrast. So here, Monum, we have an image here where like there's not a real strong sense of any lighting direction. I can see these shapes, but I would think that they should be brighter if the light is coming. It's almost like it's an underexposed image and everything is a bit dark. So you want to make sure that if you're going to do a night shot, the reason they're having you do a night shot is so that they can see the sky. So they want to make sure you can actually see the shapes. So you could go brighter on that one and then brighter on this one as well. So both of those. Stefan, this one here is actually, I think, a nice image. However, it's a bit flashed. And if you're not familiar with that term, that means that it's been brought up from the bottom and everything is kind of been has been made brighter. So if I grab this on the curve, that's flashing. So really, I mean, if I darken this down, then you're getting into a place that has a pretty nice, maybe suck some of the saturation out, but that's a bit more appropriate. And then we're seeing kind of the right amount of stars. So that's actually a pretty good image. A bit too flashed, however. Same with this image as well. This is a different sky, but Roland here, his two images here, they're both kind of like that, where it's a bit flashed, and it's this low contrast. It's also actually seems like it's causing some crunching. So you have these different colors kind of poking through, and banding and stuff like that. So something to take a look at. All right, so now we're going to be talking about city lights. If you take a look back at this original image, we have a lot of different colors on the city lights, and here's some representations of where the city lights could really add some color, in the city lights could really add to these paintings. So here's one from Paul. Add some color in those city lights. This one here, this has a little bit of color, but could probably do more. That's Maxim. And Daniel here, these are kind of have gone dark, so they're not even bright. So you want to, like, those dots are indications of light, light emitting from houses. And if it's not that, then it needs to be something else. Maybe they're just little reflective bits or something like that. But those look like lights, and so they should be emitting some light. So here, something that Anna has done is she's kind of painted in the lights. So you have a couple of different approaches for painting in lights. Certainly you can do that. I think on this, you need to be a bit more careful about where you're putting your lights and making them look realistic, as opposed to just kind of like, there's some like dot scattering kind of look that it looks like right here. So certainly, like what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this image too, and you can actually, nighttime photography is really great for using elements. So you can grab this, extract all of the lights, and then put it on top of your painting. And so you're actually using this image and the color of all these lights on your image, and then you don't have to paint them, which is great because it gives you something realistic very quickly. All right, so Benjamin here, this is a nice image up here. I think the color down here, we would need to see a bit more color down there. Say Lou here, same thing. This is has that high contrast, kind of crunchy, but color, definitely color down in the city would help. Here with Paul, some lights down there, and that would kind of, just taking an image like this and putting in colored lights down there would actually make it not feel monochromatic. So here for Paul, it's kind of leaning on that. It's kind of monochromatic. It's gonna feel like monochromatic until you start putting some color in there, and that actually could help. Okay, so so that's the city lights. The next one that we're going to be talking about here is the not really a nighttime grade. So let's take a look at this. So when we look at this, overall, the cast of this image is pretty bright. And so this is from Dario. It's not really like dark enough to be a nighttime grade. So I would look at that, bringing down the darkness. This one here, pretty bright. It looks like it's holding on to the daytime look too much, and I think you need to do more to make it that darker night look. Okay, so this one as well. This one, I think it's darker and stuff, but I think, retaining too many of these bright colors here in the foreground, and then the dark colors are super dark, and I think that makes this look daylit because of the strong highlight side. So watch out for that. It should all kind of like, the range of it should be less, and so you want to decrease the color range. Okay. So Elena here, this one as well, where it's like it's a couple of things probably. It's the highlights in here that should be brought down, the contrast levels, and then some. This little light back here kind of makes it seem a bit too bright. So bringing that down, and I think this has the same thing. I don't know if you've ever seen some of those HDR images. This kind of looks a little bit like some of those HDR images where it has your display is trying to display all of these values, and what you actually get out of your 8-bit monitor is this kind of like really high contrasty image. And so you kind of want to put like an overall cast on that. So like, even if I just put a solid color on there and shown through, I mean, this isn't really a great solution, but you look at the difference between this and that. So that kind of looks like a daylit, and then just putting like a cast, like a color cast over everything, kind of helps it even look more like night. Okay. So, and we're coming to the very last one. I think this is a really great image. This is sun, and it has a real like softness. The moon has been cheated a little bit down on screen, and it's a full moon. It could probably have a bit more of a halo and things like that. But when you look at this image, it's kind of nice. It's soft. Feels like a night sky, and it's a lot more like some of these images that we have here. So good job. So I don't typically call out anyone as a winner to these. We're all working on these, and there's not like when this video is put out, this is information for you to revisit your sky and do another iteration on your sky. So really, we don't necessarily have any winners. I may call people out and be like, hey, you did a great job. And so this is one of those honorable mentions that I'll call out. Son, I think you did a pretty good job. However, I think the halo, and that's what I have here, down here at 14, is that that if you are going to do a moon, you want to make sure that you have a halo, and that halo should just be a bit warmer. So you can see here the contrast here. So let's cut this out. I'm just going to cut this sky, or this moon, out. I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to paste it in here. So you can see the halo effect that's happening here, and it should be a bit brighter, and we should get a bit more warmth in there. And of course, it would help if it were not a full moon right there. So yeah, so just a couple of suggestions there, but like I said, that's a pretty nice image. So that's the end of the group critique, and I hope that I got everybody. If I missed you, I really apologize. Go ahead and put your work back on the Facebook page and say, hey, you missed me, and then I'll just quick shoot you maybe like just a quick critique of some of the things that that we've talked about here, maybe what category that it would fall into, as to like what would improve the image the most. So yeah, so go ahead and do that, and I appreciate you going all the way to the end of this. We're getting close to like an hour now, so even though that this has been a long video and you've already spent time working on it, there's so many different ways to do skies that it's a kind of a deep topic, and we haven't even really scratched the surface. So there's a lot more to learn. So I would encourage you, like we do for all these DMP challenges, is to go back and take a look at your work and see how you can improve it. Go through that self-scoring sheet and score yourself, make improvements, repost on the Facebook community, and get some feedback.